Ethan Cole had worked alone on the old cargo station for almost 2 years. It was a quiet place, floating above a dead moon, far away from any trade routes. Most days were the same. Fix broken systems, check oxygen levels, eat reheated meals, and sleep. He liked the silence, or at least he thought he did. Until the night the silence broke. It began with a faint scratching sound. At first, Ethan thought it was just the old metal walls contracting from the cold. But then he heard it again, louder, closer, almost like small footsteps moving across the storage bay floor. He froze, his wrench still in his hand. No ships had docked in weeks, and the station's security scans showed nothing alive except him. The sound came again, this time followed by a soft laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was light, teasing, almost like someone was playing a game with him. Ethan's pulse quickened. He set his tools aside and moved toward the noise. The dim lights flickered as if the station itself was nervous. When he reached the far end of the bay, he saw movement behind a stack of old crates. Something small darted from one shadow to another. He caught a glimpse, not of a rat, not of a drone, but of a figure, a tiny figure, no taller than his chest, with silver hair that shimmered in the dim light, and eyes that glowed faintly like molten gold. She stood there, looking at him with a half-smile. Her clothes were torn, her skin a strange pale color with faint blue markings that seemed to pulse slowly. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but she tilted her head and said, "You're slower than I expected, human." Her voice was soft but filled with mischief. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, keeping his distance. She ignored the question and instead walked casually around him, her glowing eyes scanning him up and down. "You're not scary," she said with a grin. "I thought humans were supposed to be dangerous." Ethan tried to keep his voice calm. "This is a restricted station," he said. "You shouldn't be here." The girl laughed again, a quiet, almost musical sound. "Then maybe you should catch me before I leave," she said, and with that, she darted away so quickly that Ethan almost lost sight of her. He followed, his boots clanging against the metal floor. The tiny alien moved like smoke. One moment she was there, the next she was behind another set of crates. She peeked out, sticking her tongue out at him like a child teasing a teacher. Ethan felt frustration rising, but also curiosity. She was not acting like someone lost or scared. She was playing with him, testing him, but why? When Ethan turned a corner, she was suddenly gone. No sound, no movement, just the faint smell of something sweet in the air. Then he noticed something on the floor, a small glowing charm shaped like a drop of water. It pulsed faintly, the same way the blue markings on her skin had pulsed. He bent down to pick it up, turning it in his hand. The charm was warm, almost alive. As he studied it, he heard her voice again, echoing faintly from somewhere high above. "Hold on to that, human," she called. "You might need it when the game begins." Ethan looked up, but all he saw was the flicker of a shadow moving along the catwalk. Then silence. The scratching footsteps were gone. The teasing laugh faded. Only the hum of the station's old engines remained. He slipped the charm into his pocket, whatever game she was talking about. He didn't like the sound of it, and yet, a part of him wanted to see her again. He wanted answers. Who she was, how she got here, and why she was so confident. But deep down, he had a feeling that finding those answers would mean trouble. Still, Ethan was no stranger to trouble, and something in her eyes had told him that his quiet, lonely nights on this station were over. Far above, unseen, the tiny alien girl watched him from the shadows, her smile widening. The game had begun, and she was certain the human would not be able to stop playing. The next morning, Ethan woke to the faint sound of metal tapping somewhere inside the station. It wasn't the usual creaks or hum of machinery. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like someone knocking just to annoy him. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and listened. The sound came from the workshop. When he stepped inside, his tools were scattered across the floor. Wrenches rolled lazily in different directions. Bolts clinked against the metal panels. And in the middle of the mess stood the tiny alien girl. her silver hair glowing faintly in the pale light. She held one of his screwdrivers like it was some kind of weapon. "You really should lock your doors, human," she said with a sly smile. Ethan sighed. "You really should leave," he replied. She tilted her head, pretending to think, then grinned. "No, I don't think I will." She began walking slowly around the room, tapping the screwdriver on the walls. Every now and then she would stop and stare at a piece of equipment like it was the strangest thing she had ever seen. Then she would glance back at him with a smirk. Ethan could feel his patience thinning. "You're making a mess," he said. Bending down to pick up a wrench, she quickly stepped forward, snatching the wrench from his hand. "Too slow," she teased, tossing it up and catching it. "Easily," Ethan frowned. "What do you want from me?" She gave him a look as if the answer was obvious. "To see how long before you break," she said, almost playfully. Ethan shook his head. "I'm not playing whatever game you think this is." Her eyes sparkled. "Oh, you're already playing." "Human," she replied. "You just don't know the rules yet." For the next hour, she followed him everywhere. If he tried to repair a pipe, she would turn off the lights. If he checked the control panel, she would press random buttons just to trigger warning alarms. And every time he turned to scold her, she would be gone, hiding behind crates, dangling from the upper beams, or peeking from ventilation grates. Finally, Ethan decided to catch her. "All right, little troublemaker," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how fast you really are." He pretended to ignore her, continuing his work. But as soon as she stepped close to mess with his tools again, he lunged. She squealed in surprise and darted toward the corridor. Ethan chased after her, his boots pounding against the metal floor. The chase twisted through narrow maintenance halls. She darted left, then right, always just a step ahead of him. At one point she even climbed up the side of the wall, using tiny handholds he hadn't even noticed before. Her laughter echoed through the station. "Too slow again, human," she called, her voice bouncing from wall to wall. Ethan almost caught her near the hydroponics bay. She slipped, and for a second her hand brushed against his. But before he could grab her properly, a sharp, blaring alarm cut through the air. It wasn't one of the fake alarms she had triggered earlier. This was the real station security alarm. Red lights flashed. Along the corridor, Ethan glanced at her, expecting her to laugh again. But this time her smile had faded. "What did you do?" he asked. She shook her head, her expression suddenly serious. "That wasn't me," she whispered. Ethan checked the nearest terminal. The screen displayed an alert. "Unauthorized docking detected. Bay 2. His stomach tightened. Bay 2 was one of the old, unused docks. Nobody should have been able to open it without clearance. The girl's eyes narrowed. "They found me," she said quietly. Before Ethan could ask who, she darted toward the ventilation shafts, moving faster than before. "Wait," he called, but she was gone in seconds, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan stared down the corridor toward Bay 2. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, heavy and deliberate. Whoever had docked wasn't hiding their arrival. He thought about the charm still in his pocket from last night. Was this game of hers just a distraction, or had she been warning him all along? The tapping games and mocking smiles were gone now. The air felt heavier, charged with something dangerous. Ethan had no idea what he had gotten himself into. But one thing was clear: the tiny alien girl was in trouble. And if she was in trouble, that meant he was too. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the hollow corridors of the station. Ethan pressed his back against the wall near the intersection, straining his ears. There were at least 2 of them, maybe more. Their steps were heavy, metallic, as if they were wearing armor. The sound sent a cold chill down his spine. He glanced at the ventilation shaft where the tiny alien girl had disappeared. Her glowing eyes were no longer peeking out. She was gone, hidden somewhere deep in the station's maze of tunnels. And now, he was the only one standing between these strangers and her. The first figure appeared from the shadows, tall, broad, and dressed in dark armored plates that shimmered faintly in the emergency lights. A strange mask covered his face, with two long tubes running down his back. The second figure stepped forward, scanning the area with a glowing visor. Both carried weapons, sleek black rifles that looked far more advanced than anything Ethan had ever handled. Ethan stepped into view, trying to act calm. "This is a private station," he said, his voice steady. "You have no clearance here." The one with the visor tilted his head. "We are here for someone." The voice was low, mechanical. Fugitive." Ethan's stomach tightened. He didn't need to guess who they were talking about. "There's no one here but me," Ethan replied. The masked figure stepped closer, the armor clicking softly with each move. "You're lying," he said flatly. "She was tracked to this location." Ethan forced his face to stay neutral. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said. The visor glowed brighter, scanning him from head to toe. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the visor wearer spoke again. "If you are hiding her, human, you are already dead." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I told you," he said firmly. "There's no one here." The masked man gave a sharp signal with his hand. Both of them turned and began searching the bay, opening crates, scanning the walls, checking corners. Ethan stood there, trying not to look nervous. Every second they stayed increased the risk of them finding her. Then, faintly, he heard something from above, a quiet tapping sound. It was the same tapping she had used earlier to tease him, only this time it was different. It was slower, deliberate, almost like a signal. He looked up, just enough to see a faint shimmer in the shadows. She was there, watching. Her small hand pressed to her lips in a stay quiet gesture. The two armored figures finished scanning the room. One of them turned to Ethan. "We will be back," he said. "If you are found helping her, there will be no mercy." And then they left, their heavy steps fading into the distance. Ethan waited until the echoes disappeared before speaking. "You mind telling me what that was all about?" he said, looking up at her hiding place. The tiny alien girl climbed down with effortless grace, landing lightly on the floor. Her usual teasing smile was gone. "They're bounty hunters," she said quietly. "And they want me alive. Why?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting them to return. "It's complicated," she said. "Let's just say I'm valuable to the wrong kind of people." Ethan frowned. "That's not an answer," he said. She crossed her arms, her golden eyes narrowing. "And you're not in a position to demand one," she replied. "But if you keep me safe, maybe I'll tell you." Ethan rubbed his temples. "You've been messing with me since the moment you showed up," he said. "If you'd told me this sooner, you would have thrown me out." She interrupted. "Don't lie." He stared at her, realizing she was probably right. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She tilted her head. "Names are dangerous," she said softly. "But you can call me Lyra." Ethan repeated it quietly. Lyra. It fit her somehow, strange and light, yet sharp. "And you?" she asked. "Ethan," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Ethan," she said slowly, as if testing the word. "You might survive this game after all." Ethan didn't like the way she said that. "What game?" he asked. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one where you either outsmart them or die trying." Before Ethan could respond, a deep metallic clang echoed from the far side of the station. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're not gone," she said quickly. "They're searching every deck." Ethan's mind raced. If the bounty hunters found her, they'd kill him too. He had to make a choice, hand her over and save himself, or hide her and risk everything. Lyra seemed to read his hesitation. She stepped closer, her small frame almost touching his. "You'll keep me safe," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Ethan swallowed, unsure if she was right or if she was just trying to manipulate him. Either way, it was too late to turn back now. The faint glow from her markings reflected off the metal walls. It was strange for someone so small. She carried a weight of danger around her, and Ethan knew, deep down, that whatever secret she was hiding, it was going to change his life forever. The station lights dimmed without warning. A low hum vibrated through the floor, followed by the deep thud of the outer airlock ceiling. Ethan's heart skipped. "They're cutting off exits," Lyra whispered, her golden eyes sharp and alert. "They know I'm still here." Ethan grabbed a portable light from the wall. Its beam cut through the dark corridor like a blade. The metallic clang of armored boots echoed from somewhere deep in the station. It was closer now, moving steadily toward them. Lyra's small frame tensed. She didn't look scared. She looked ready. "Where can we hide?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She pointed toward the maintenance shaft above them. "We can fit through there, but you'll have to lift me," she said. Ethan crouched, letting her step onto his shoulder. She moved quickly, pulling herself into the narrow opening. He followed, his boots scraping the metal walls. The shaft was cramped and dark. They could only crawl forward, their movements slow and deliberate. Behind them, the heavy steps grew louder. The bounty hunters were following. Ethan's breath quickened. If they looked up, they would see the shaft door still swinging. Lyra stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. Ethan froze. Through a thin grate in the wall, they could see the corridor below. Two bounty hunters stood there, scanning the area with their glowing visors. One of them raised a scanner. A faint beam swept over the walls and ceiling. The beam stopped for a second on their grate. Ethan felt his muscles tense. "Keep still," Lyra mouthed silently. The beam moved away. After a long moment, the hunters turned and walked down the corridor. Their boots made the metal vibrate even after they were gone. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That was too close," he whispered. Lyra smirked slightly. "Now you see why I play games," she said softly. "It keeps you sharp." Ethan shook his head. "This isn't a game anymore," he replied. Her smirk faded, replaced by a faint shadow in her eyes. "It never was," she murmured. They crawled through the shaft until it opened into the hydroponics bay. The faint green glow from the plants bathed the room in an eerie light. Lyra jumped down lightly, landing without a sound. Ethan followed, his boots making a dull thud. "We can stay here for now," she said. "The plants block heat signatures." They didn't have long to rest. The bay doors slid open. Suddenly, with a hiss, two hunters stepped in, weapons ready. Lyra's eyes widened. "They found us," she whispered. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far corner. They slipped behind a row of tall plants. Crouching low, through the leaves, Ethan could see the hunters moving slowly, scanning each row. One of them stopped just a few meters away, his visor glowing brighter. Ethan could hear the faint hum of his weapon charging. Lyra squeezed Ethan's hand. Her markings began to glow more brightly. "What are you doing?" Ethan whispered. "Buying us a few seconds," she replied, before he could stop her. She darted out from behind the plants. Her small figure was a blur of light as she ran across the bay. The hunters shouted, their weapons firing bright pulses of energy. The shots missed, searing through leaves and scorching the walls. "Lyra!" Ethan hissed. She glanced back, her smirk returning for just a moment. Then she slipped through a small hatch near the floor, disappearing into another shaft. The hunters chased after her, leaving Ethan alone. For a split second, Ethan considered staying hidden. If she got caught, it wouldn't be his problem anymore. But something in his gut told him that wasn't an option. He sprinted toward the hatch, crawling inside just as the sound of weapons echoed ahead. The chase twisted through another maze of tunnels. Every turn seemed tighter, every shadow deeper. Ethan could hear Lyra's quick breaths ahead. The hunters were still behind them, their armored boots hammering the metal like drums of war. Finally, Lyra dropped into a small storage chamber. Ethan followed, landing heavily. She pointed to a narrow door at the far end. "That leads to the docking ring," she said quickly. "If we can get there, we can lock them out." They ran for the door, but just as Ethan reached it, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was one of the hunters, his visor glowing red now. The other appeared behind them, blocking the way back. They were trapped. Ethan stepped in front of Lyra instinctively. The hunter raised his weapon. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said in that mechanical voice. Ethan clenched his fists. "She's not yours," he replied. The hunter tilted his head. "She's worth more than your life." "Human." Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm. "Then you'll have to take me," she said. Ethan glanced at her in shock. Her golden eyes met his for just a second, a silent signal before she moved. In one swift motion, she grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward the door. A blinding flash erupted from her markings. The hunter staggered back, blinded for just a moment. Ethan slammed his hand on the control panel. The door slid open, and they darted through into the docking ring. Behind them, the hunter's angry shouts echoed. But for now, they were out of sight. Lyra leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "That," she said between breaths, "was the real game." Ethan stared at her. "If that's the game, I think I hate it," he muttered. She smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "It means you're still alive." Asterisk. The docking ring was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the faint hum of the station's backup generators filled the air. Ethan leaned against the cold wall, catching his breath. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her glowing markings dim now, like fading embers. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked tired. "You used whatever that was," Ethan said, his voice low. "The light. It blinded them." Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "It's not something I can use often," she said finally. "It drains me." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You could have told me earlier," he said. She gave a small smirk. "Would you have stayed if you knew how dangerous this was?" Ethan didn't respond. His silence was enough of an answer. She leaned back, resting her head against the wall. "You know, human," she murmured, "you're not as dull as I thought." Ethan chuckled under his breath. "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." For a few moments, they just sat there. The chaos of the chase was over for now, but the tension between them hung in the air. Ethan pulled the small glowing charm from his pocket and held it up. "This," he said. "You dropped it when we first met." Lyra's gaze softened. "It's not just a charm," she said quietly. "It's a key." "A key to what?" Ethan asked. "To where I'm from," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan wanted to ask more, but before he could, the station lights flickered. The low hum grew louder. "Power grid's failing," he said. Lyra nodded. "The storm is close," she said. "By nightfall, the whole station will be dark." They both knew what that meant. If the bounty hunters struck during the blackout, it would be nearly impossible to see them coming. For the rest of the day, they worked side by side. Ethan repaired what he could of the power relays. Lyra, despite her small size, climbed into tight spaces he couldn't reach, reconnecting cables and sealing damaged panels. Every time their hands brushed, neither of them spoke. It was an unspoken agreement. They were no longer just strangers. They were survival partners. As the hours passed, the first signs of the storm appeared outside the docking ring windows. Massive clouds of charged particles swirled through the void, glowing with streaks of electric blue. The station's shields shimmered faintly, struggling to hold against the rising energy. By evening, the lights in most corridors had gone out completely. Only emergency strips along the floors guided their way. The station felt different in the dark, more like a trap than a shelter. Lyra stayed close to Ethan now, no longer darting ahead to tease him. Her steps were silent, her gaze sharp. When they reached the control room, Ethan locked the doors behind them. The small space was lit only by the dim green glow of old monitors. "Storm will last all night," Ethan said, checking the readings. Lyra climbed onto the chair next to him, folding her legs. "Then we wait," she said simply. Hours passed. Slowly, outside, the storm howled, the sound vibrating through the station walls. Inside, Ethan and Lyra sat in the glow of the screens, occasionally exchanging glances. At one point, she pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them. "You know," she began, her voice quieter than before. "I didn't choose to run away." Ethan turned toward her. "Then why are you here?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something he hadn't seen before, fear. "Because if I stayed, they would have used me," she said, "for things I can't even say out loud." Ethan didn't push her for details, he could tell. It wasn't easy for her to admit that much. Instead, he said, "Then we'll make sure they never get the chance." Her golden eyes met his, and for a long moment, there was no teasing in her expression, only trust. The storm raged on, and the control room felt smaller as the hours dragged. At one point, Lyra leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Ethan glanced at her but didn't move. Her breathing slowed, and he realized she had fallen asleep. He stayed still, letting her rest. The sound of the storm outside felt less frightening with her there, even if he didn't want to admit it. By the time the first signs of dawn began to glow faintly through the storm clouds, Ethan knew something had changed between them. They didn't need to say it out loud. It was in the way she trusted him enough to sleep by his side, and in the way he no longer thought about turning her in. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The storm hit its peak just as the last bit of power died. The control room went completely black, except for the faint emergency glow strips along the floor. Outside, lightning-like bursts of energy rippled across the stations. Shields, each one making the walls shudder. Ethan could feel the vibrations through the floor. The sound was deafening, like the roar of 1,000 drums. Lyra's golden eyes glimmered faintly in the darkness. Her small frame was tense, her gaze shifting toward the sealed door. "They'll come tonight," she said quietly. "They'll use the storm as cover." Ethan nodded, gripping the handle of his old plasma cutter, the closest thing he had to a weapon. The minutes dragged. The storm outside raged without mercy. Each time the walls trembled, Ethan expected to hear the sound of the door being forced open. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, the glowing charm between her hands. It pulsed faintly, almost in rhythm with her breathing. "What does it do?" Ethan asked. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's more than a key. It's a beacon." "A beacon for what?" he pressed. "For help. If I dare to use it," she replied. "But using it means they'll know exactly where we are." That left only two options: call for help and risk being swarmed, or wait in the dark and hope the hunters didn't find them. Neither felt safe. For a while, they spoke in low voices, discussing possible escape routes. But the truth was simple. With the storm cutting off travel and comes, there was no way out tonight. Suddenly, a sound broke through the storm's roar, a faint metallic scraping along the outer wall of the station. Lyra's head snapped toward the noise. "They're here," she whispered. Ethan moved to the console, checking the outer sensors. But the storm interference turned the screen into static. Then came the thud. Heavy, deliberate, like someone attaching to the station's hull. It repeated 3 times before going silent. They both knew what it meant. The hunters were outside, moving toward an access hatch. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and motioned for Lyra to follow. They slipped out of the control room into the dark corridors, moving quickly but quietly. The glow strips on the floor barely lit the way. Every few steps, the station shook under the storm's force, sending dust drifting from the ceiling. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, but the hallway remained empty. Lyra stayed close now. No teasing, no smirking, just silence. When they reached the junction near the cargo bay, they heard it, the faint hiss of a hatch opening somewhere nearby. Ethan raised the plasma cutter. The sound of boots followed, heavy and unhurried. "They're inside," Lyra said, her voice a thin thread of sound. Ethan quickly pulled her toward a maintenance shaft. It was narrow, forcing them to crouch. They moved deeper until they reached a small observation window overlooking the bay. Through the glass they saw 2 bounty hunters entering, weapons drawn, their visors glowing red in the darkness. A third figure followed, taller than the others, his armor heavier, his presence commanding. Lyra's breath caught. "That's their leader," She whispered. "If he's here, they won't leave without me." Ethan's grip on the cutter tightened. He didn't know how to fight trained hunters, but he knew he wouldn't just hand her over. For almost an hour, they stayed in the shaft, watching the hunters search. Every so often, one of them would stop and scan the shadows. Ethan's knees ached from crouching, but he didn't dare move. Lyra's small hand rested lightly against his arm, a silent reminder that they were in this together. The storm outside began to fade, but that only made things worse with less interference. The hunters' scanners would start picking up heat signatures more clearly. "They'll find us soon," Lyra murmured. Ethan looked at her and made a decision. "We move now," he said. They slipped out of the shaft and into the lower maintenance tunnels. It was a maze down here, pipes running along the walls, steam hissing from broken valves. The air was warm and thick, making it harder to breathe. Behind them, faint echoes of boots followed. The hunters were tracking them. At one point, they reached a dead end. The bulkhead was sealed, and the override was offline. Ethan cursed under his breath. Lyra looked around quickly, spotting a narrow crawl space above the pipes. Without hesitation, she climbed up and extended her hand to him. He hesitated. It looked barely wide enough for her, let alone him, but the sound of boots drew closer, and he didn't have time to think. They squeezed through, the metal scraping against their clothes. Ethan's shoulders barely fit, but somehow they made it to the other side. They dropped into a small, dim-lit chamber, one Ethan recognized as the emergency life support control room. It wasn't much, but it had only one entrance, meaning they could defend it. Lyra leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "This is the longest night I've ever had," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her and managed a tired smile. "Yeah," he replied, "and it's not over yet." The two of them sat in the dim glow, listening for the sound of the hunters. Neither spoke much now, but there was no need. The unspoken bond they had formed in the past hours was enough. If they made it through this night, they both knew, they wouldn't be going their separate ways. The storm outside had begun to fade. The violent rumbles grew distant, replaced by a low, steady hum as the station systems tried to restart. Inside the emergency life support control room, Ethan sat against the wall, his plasma cutter resting across his lap. Lyra was curled up beside him, her head against his shoulder, her golden eyes half closed but alert. For hours they had listened, waiting for the sound of boots. The bounty hunters had searched every deck, but the emergency life support section was shielded and hard to scan. That had bought them time still. Ethan knew they couldn't stay here forever. A faint metallic creak came from the hallway outside. Ethan tensed, gripping the cutter. Lyra's eyes snapped fully open, her small hand brushing his arm. The sound lingered for a moment, then faded away. Maybe the hunters were leaving, or maybe they were setting a trap. Finally, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a pale orange glow. The storm had passed enough for some power to return. Ethan stood and moved cautiously to the doorway. The corridor outside was empty. No footsteps, no voices, no glowing red visors. "They're gone," he said, his voice low. Lyra climbed to her feet, brushing dust from her clothes. "For now," she said. "But they'll be back, Ethan." He knew she was right. Hunters didn't give up, especially not on targets like her. They made their way through the quiet station. It felt strange to walk the halls without the storm shaking the walls. Debris littered the floor from the nights. Chaos, panels hung loose. Some corridors were sealed off entirely. Ethan realized it would take weeks to repair the damage, if it could be repaired at all. When they reached the docking ring, they stopped. Through the wide viewing window, the black expanse of space stretched endlessly, the dead moon spinning. Silently below, Lyra stood there, her hands resting lightly on the glass. The soft light from the stars caught in her silver hair, making it shimmer. "This place won't be safe anymore," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. "You have somewhere else to go." She hesitated. "I can call for help," she admitted. "But once I do, I can't go back to hiding." She turned her gaze to him. "And you'll be dragged into this for good." Ethan thought about the life he had before she arrived. Quiet, lonely, predictable. It had been safe, but it had never felt alive. Now, despite the danger, he felt something different. Purpose, connection, maybe even belonging. He smiled faintly. "Guess I'm already in it for good," he said, for a moment. She didn't reply. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small glowing charm. She pressed it into his hand. "Then you should be the one to call," she said. Ethan glanced down at it, feeling its faint warmth against his skin. "How?" "Hold it and think of where you want to go," she explained softly. "It will find the way." He stared at the charm for a long moment before closing his hand around it. The glow grew brighter, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Somewhere far away, something had heard them. Lyra's expression softened. "They'll come quickly now," she said. "We need to be ready to leave." They gathered what little they could carry, tools, food packs, and a few of Ethan's personal things. The station's hum grew louder as the engine stabilized, but there was no comfort in it. They both knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters returned. As they stood by the docking bay, the faint shimmer of light appeared outside the window. It grew rapidly, taking the shape of a sleek vessel unlike anything had ever seen. Its hull glowed faintly with the same energy as Lyra's markings. "That's yours?" Ethan asked. Lyra nodded. "It's from my people," she said. "They'll take us far from here." A low chime echoed through the bay as the ship locked onto the docking ring. The doors began to open, letting in a wash of warm, golden light. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, looking back at the station. It had been his home, lonely, quiet, and empty. But still his home. Now it was just another place he was leaving behind. Lyra noticed his pause and stepped closer. "You could stay," she said softly. "If you want to." He met her gaze. "And let you face them alone?" he asked. Her smirk returned, faint but genuine. "Knew you wouldn't," she said. They stepped onto the ship together, the doors sealing behind them. As the vessel pulled away from the station, Ethan watched it grow smaller until it was just a speck against the stars. Lyra sat beside him, her eyes fixed ahead. "Where to now?" he asked. She glanced at him, her smile warmer than he had ever seen. "Anywhere but here, human," she said. "And maybe somewhere you'll never be bored again." Ethan chuckled. "Somehow, I don't think boredom is going to be a problem anymore." The ship jumped into the dark, leaving the station, the hunters, and the storm behind. But Ethan knew that this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined.